Okay, in this video we're going to look at some word problems, and we're going to set up these word problems using algebra. Now it's important that you do these word problems using the algebraic techniques and not just try to figure them out in your head like some students will try to do, because this is very good practice on solving polynomial equations. Okay, so let's take a look at the first problem. The square of a negative number is 15 more than twice the number. Find the number. So the idea here is to assign a variable to the unknown. So in this case, we're going to let n represent the number, or you could use x or whatever. We're going to let n represent the number. And now we're going to set up an equation using the information given. We know that if we square the number, so if we square n, it must equal twice the number plus 15. That would be 15 more than twice the number. Okay, so now that's the hard part, setting up the equation. The rest of it's pretty easy. Since this is a second degree equation, we'll just move all the terms over to the left and then solve it by factoring. So if I move the 2n to the left, it becomes minus 2n. Move the 15 to the left, it becomes minus 15. And now I can solve this polynomial equation simply by factoring, because I've got it equal to 0. And now if you factor this, it factors into n minus 5 and n plus 3. It's really a pretty simple one to factor. And then if you set each factor equal to 0, you get n minus 5 equals 0 and n plus 3 equals 0. So if you solve each of those equations, there's actually two answers, n equal 5 or n equals negative 3. But it does ask for the negative number. So it does say the answer is a negative number. So our answer must be n equal negative 3. Okay? Next problem. It says the sum of two numbers is 8. And the sum of the squares of the number is 34. Find the numbers. Okay, this one is a little more complicated, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to let x be one number and y be the other, and that's just for temporary. So I'm going to actually replace y in a minute. Okay, now since their sum is 8, then we know that x plus y equals 8. So if I solve this for y, I can actually find out that the second number in terms of x would be, just move the x to the other side, we know that y would equal 8 minus x. So now I know that the two numbers can be expressed as x for one number and 8 minus x for the other number. And now let's see what it says. It says the sum of their squares is 34. Okay, so if I want to, I'm going to sum their squares. So I take the square of the first number, that's just x squared, and I add it to the square of the second number, which is 8 minus x quantity squared, and that must equal 34. Now, the problem that we run into here is we've got to square 8 minus x. And so to square a binomial, remember what you do is you square the first term, so that's 64, and then you double the product of the two terms. So I have 8 times minus x, that's minus 8x, and then double it, I get minus 16x. And then I add the square of the last term, so that's going to be plus x squared. So that's how I square 8 minus x. And then notice here, if I add x squared and 2x squared, x squared and x squared, I get 2x squared. So I have 2x squared minus 16x plus 64 equals 34. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to subtract 34 from both sides so I can get this 34 to the other side. So subtract 34 from both sides, and so 64 minus 34 is going to be 30. So I have 2x squared minus 16x plus 30 equals 0. So now that I've got it set equal to 0, I can try to solve it by factoring. Now the first thing you always want to do is factor out the greatest common factor. Since each of these coefficients can be divided by 2, I'm going to factor a 2 out. So if I factor a 2 out, I get 2 times x squared minus 8x plus 15. And then the x squared minus 8x plus 15 will factor into x minus 5 and x minus 3. Now I know the 2 cannot equal 0, so the only options I have here for this product to be 0 is either x minus 5 is 0 or x minus 3 is 0. Well, then that means either x is 5. Now if x is 5, then remember the other number was 8 minus x. So if x is 5, then the other number must be 8 minus 5, which is 3. Okay, but we did have another option here. What if x was 3? What if x minus 3 equals 0? Well, if x minus 3 equals 0, then x could be 3. And if x is 3, then 8 minus x would be 5. So either way, it looks like the two numbers must be 5 and 3. That's a typo. It should be 3. So either way, the two numbers are 5 and 3. So that's the two numbers. And you can check this. If you square 5, you get 25. You square 3, you get 9. 25 plus 9 is certainly 34. Okay, on this one it says an object is released from the top of a building 320 feet high. The initial velocity is negative 32 feet per second and air resistance is neglected. How many seconds later will the object hit the ground? Now I'm going to give you a formula here. This is really a physics problem, but as long as I give you a formula, you should be safe. So I'm going to give you this formula. S equals negative 32t plus 16t squared, where S is the distance fallen and t is time. So that's the formula you're going to use. Now it says, when will the object hit the ground? So to find when the object hits the ground, since S represents the distance well, actually, S is not the distance fallen, it's the distance from the ground. I'm sorry, S is the distance above the ground. So if S is the distance above the ground, well then when it hits the ground, then S will be 0. So let me mark that out. Okay, so S would be 0. Now, so let S be 0, and then you can solve this by factoring. You can factor a negative 16t out of these two terms, and when you factor negative 16t out of here, you're going to get 2, and if you factor a negative 16t out of here, you're going to get minus t. So you're going to get negative 16t times 2 minus t equals 0. So either negative 16t equals 0 or 2 minus t equals 0. And so if you solve this one, you get t equals 0 seconds. But if you solve the 2 minus t equals 0, you get t equal 2 seconds. Now t equal 2 seconds is the answer because 0 seconds wouldn't make any sense because that's when the object is released. Okay, the next one. The width of a rectangle is 5 less than the length, and the area is 176 square feet. Find the length. Okay, so we're going to let L be the length of the rectangle, and since the width is 5 less, then L minus 5 is going to be the width. Now, we know that the area, length times width, is area for a rectangle. So since we know the width is L minus 5, we can say that length times L minus 5 has to equal area, but the area is given to be 176. So we know that L times L minus 5 is equal to 176. And then if we multiply this out, we get L squared minus 5L. And then notice I went ahead and moved the 176 to the left, and that's how I got the minus 176. So I actually did two steps here. I multiplied the L times L minus 5, and I moved the 176 over. Well, now I can solve this by factoring. This actually factors into L minus 16 and L plus 11. So L minus 16 would have to be 0, or L plus 11 would be 0. And so that means L has to either equal 16 or negative 11. But since the length cannot be a negative number, then the answer for the length must be 16, or 16 feet. Okay, one more here. The product of two consecutive odd numbers is 143. Find the integers, which just means find the numbers. So, the two consecutive, it says, two consecutive odd positive integers is what it says. So, the two consecutive odd integers can be represented by x and x plus 2, because remember, odd numbers differ by 2. So we can let x be the smallest of the odd numbers and x plus 2 be the largest of the odd numbers. Now it says their product is 143, so that means that x times x plus 2 must equal 143. And so x times x plus 2 is x squared plus 2x, so x squared plus 2x must equal 143. And then I can move the 143 over and get x squared plus 2x minus 143 equals 0. And then I can solve this by factoring. I get x minus 11 times x plus 13 for the factors. So x minus 11 is 0, or x plus 13 must be 0. So that if I solve x minus 11, I get x equal 11. If I solve x plus 13 equals 0, I get x equal negative 13. Well, since it only asks for the positive values, I'm only going to use x equal 11. But remember, x equal 11 is the smaller of the two numbers, and so the other number would be 2 more than 11, which would be 13. So x plus 2 would be 13. So the two numbers that I'm looking for are 11 and 13. And that pretty much completes this. I'll probably do another video on just a summary of factoring, but that pretty much completes the unit on polynomials.